Hello and welcome to my spoiler talk for The Flash. In this video it does pretty much what it says on the tin. I'm going to be going over a few of the spoilery details for the movie The Flash, released in 2023. It's stuff that I wanted to talk about in my spoiler-free review, but I couldn't because, well, spoilers. As usual, I'm not going to go over absolutely everything that is in this movie, but there are definitely a lot of things that I did want to talk about and I did want to mention. And just before we start, I do need to mention that I am going to be talking about the two different Barry Allens that are in this movie. And just to avoid any confusion later on, I'm going to be referring to the characters as Barry 1, the main Barry that we follow from the beginning of the film, and Barry 2, the younger Barry from 2013. So let's begin. The first thing I need to talk about is how the multiverse is depicted in this film. It's very different to other multiversal movies and TV shows, a prime example being the MCU, which depicts the multiverse as a tree with multiple branches representing timelines. In this movie they really explain it pretty well. Honestly, this might be the best explanation outside of Crisis on Two Earths, which is a phenomenal movie and absolutely worth seeing. They explain it using spaghetti to show that even though Barry changes something in the past, it doesn't just limit when the change happens, because logically, like Back to the Future, a movie that gets a lot of shout outs in this, that shows that only events after the change are affected, but everything before that stays the same. In this movie they show that changing something creates a fixed point in time that creates a ripple effect, and Barry essentially is now put on a different timeline that has a completely different history, but one where several other fixed points still happen, such as the origin of Batman and the Kryptonian coming to Earth. As Across the Spider-Verse says, canon events, defining moments that shape a person into who they are meant to be. And how this is handled in the movie I do really like, and as I said, this is one of the better explanations for how it all works. I also really like how small the change is, where Barry is warned about messing with history by Batman, both Batmen, who seem to know an awful lot about this stuff. He changes the smallest thing he can that can have the smallest ripple effect that he can possibly think of, and that is a can of tomatoes. His mother, Nora Allen, forgets to get an extra can of tomatoes from their local shop, so Barry's father, Henry, goes to the shop to get them, and because he isn't at home, something happens and Nora is killed. When Barry goes back in time, he makes sure that she has that extra can, which means Henry doesn't leave and Nora lives. I love how small this is, and it does fit within the narrative very well. I do think that they definitely could have done something a little bit different, which I will talk about in a minute, but it does make sense for this story. Barry has to learn his lesson and ultimately has to change things back before the world ends, and honestly, the scene where he sees his mother one last time in the shop is one of the best scenes of the entire movie. I love how it's handled, and this is one of the moments that made Ezra Miller's performance much better than it was in Justice League. Which is a bit strange considering a few seconds later Barry changes things once again just to get his dad out of prison. So he hasn't learned his lesson, and I'll definitely be coming back to this later. I do need to mention this now, but how Nora Allen is killed in this movie, we don't see what happens to her. We just hear a thud, and then later we see her on the kitchen floor being held by Henry with a knife sticking out of her. They also go out their way to establish that Henry Allen is out of the house when this happens. So we as an audience know for 100% certainty that he is innocent, so we are with Barry throughout this entire movie. In the comics, the animated movie and the CW show, the killer is actually the Reverse Flash, Eobard Thawne, but in this movie this doesn't really add up for me considering who he is. Henry Allen being there would absolutely not stop Thawne from attacking, as is the case with the CW show where both the Future Flash and Reverse Flash fight each other in the house. Thawne does not care. His goal is to ruin Barry's life, so Henry just being in the house would not stop him from doing that. The irony of that story for Thawne is that him going back and killing Nora actually sets Barry on his path to becoming the Flash. He essentially creates his arch enemy, so I do wonder how that would have played out in this continuity. And this isn't me theorising, this has been openly confirmed by the director Andy Muschietti that the Reverse Flash kills Nora Allen within the DCEU. I get why they decided not to show that, because Barry hasn't even met Thawne at this point, and it would be too much to add into the story considering just how much there actually is going on. But how it's handled, to me, I think the idea of Barry just coming home from school and finding Nora there after Thawne's already been and gone makes much more sense to me overall, because it would really play into the mystery of did Henry Allen do it or not. But I do get the reason for the change in this version. That being said, even though there are a lot of differences between this movie and the Flashpoint story, this is a lot closer to the Flashpoint story than I thought it might be, and it does have some big moments that are directly taken from that story, such as both the Flash and Batman Batman going to save Superman, only in this version of events it's Supergirl. How Barry's first encounter with the alternate Batman goes at Wayne Manor, and it also sees Barry 1 losing his powers and having to recreate the lightning strike that gave him his speed. And I'm surprised that they actually included that and really went for it. It is a pretty grisly scene in the comics and animated movie, so I am really shocked that they actually included it, but I'm really happy that they did. And I'm actually quite happy how they managed to include the Flash's origin story in this as well, in a way that fits the story, and it feels very different from other superhero origin movies. And part of the reason for that is because Barry 1 has to take Barry 2 to the forensics lab where he originally gained his powers, and he has to make sure Barry 2 is struck by lightning, otherwise his own powers disappear. Even though he does lose his powers anyway, and a tooth for some reason. But we do get one of the funniest scenes after this with Barry 1 trying to run in the most awkward way possible. It really feels like a bit of an inside joke to all the people who did make fun of the way that Ezra Miller does run in Justice League, because it just looks so strange. While I was watching this movie and getting absorbed into the story, I genuinely forgot about one thing that happens early on, and it's the introduction of a character that sets the entire plot in motion. His appearance was actually spoiled in the marketing and toys, and when watching the trailers I did wonder how it was that they were going to incorporate him into this. And that character is Dark Flash. Dark Flash only has 3 scenes in this movie, 2 of which are very brief. So brief in fact that you might actually forget he was in this, but he does have a proper introduction later on and we find out who he is. And I've got to be honest, this was one of the more disappointing elements for me. Not the reveal of who he is, in fact I actually really like the build up, but it's the fact that they reveal and pretty much everything Dark Flash related only happens in the last 20 minutes or so of the movie, and then they kill him off. Essentially what happens is during the final battle between the heroes and Zod, both Batman and Supergirl are killed, so the Barrys go back in time to try and undo things and start again, but the same thing happens and Barry 2 gets injured. They try again, but Barry 1 starts to realise that these events cannot be changed and that world that they are in will end. But Barry 2 is convinced that it can be saved, and with him going more and more crazy, getting more and more injured along the way, he constantly keeps going back in time to try and undo things. And it slowly becomes more apparent that Barry 2 actually is Dark Flash, or at least Dark Flash is Barry 2's future. It's a twist that most people admittedly did see coming, but it is a clever idea and a good twist on the usual mirror image villains most superheroes tend to go up against in their debut films. But this is the stuff that I was referring to when I said that this movie should have been a lot longer, because it is very rushed and it is a letdown. I would have liked to have seen Dark Flash have more of a presence, maybe hunting Barry throughout the movie, and I reckon we could have had a speedster chase throughout the multiverse. And that could have taken inspiration from the power moves in Injustice 2 where Flash grabs hold of someone and drags them across time, or even the Savitar fight from the CW show. And I reckon that could have been a really great way to explore other worlds and have some fun with the cameos and different styles. You could have even had them go into the animated universe. So I do think that there is a lot of missed opportunities, and what they could have done with Dark Flash is easily the biggest one for me. I like how he ties into Barry's arc, and what Barry 2 goes through is a great lesson for Barry 1 to learn, but it really was rushed. And when it comes to his design, I'm not a fan of it. As I said, all of this happens towards the end, and the end has definitely split people, and even I'm a bit mixed on it. Because, as I said, the movie ends with Barry changing things once again to get his dad out of prison. All seems well, he even gets to ask out Iris, played by Kirstie Clemons, but then he gets a phone call from Bruce Wayne, and then a car pulls up. And out steps George Clooney, who very infamously played Batman in Batman and Robin, which is considered not only the worst Batman movie, but also one of the worst films ever made. And I'll admit, I did find that scene, that reveal, quite funny, but it is a bit of an odd note for this movie to end on. He had been rumoured to make an appearance in this movie, but I didn't think that they'd actually do it. Part of the reason being that I'd already heard what the ending would be, and those set pictures of Michael Keaton and Sasha Calle outside the courthouse back this up. Originally, Michael Keaton's Bruce Wayne was meant to show up at the end, setting up the now cancelled Batgirl movie. Sasha Calle's Supergirl was also meant to appear, and they even used a shot of this in the trailers. And I also believe, and I'm not sure this has been 100% confirmed, Gal Gadot would have returned as Wonder Woman after a brief appearance earlier on in the movie, which does seem to become a bit of a regular thing for her to do now between this and Shazam Fury of the Gods, as well as Henry Cavill as Superman. Again, I'm not sure how true this is, so don't take my word for it, but the idea was was for this movie to set up a number of different spin-offs, like the Batgirl movie, a Supergirl movie with Sasha Calle, and a Crisis on Infinite Earths movie that would have also seen Ben Affleck returning as Batman. But since this isn't happening now, as far as I know, this was changed in order to not provide false promises, according to James Gunn, which has unfortunately been a big thing with DC movies over the past. So as disappointing as it is that we don't get to see this alternate ending, I do understand why they went a different way. Well, I suppose I put this bit off long enough. Let's talk about the cameos. George Clooney, as I said, does have a little small cameo in this movie, and he's the last of the older actors to appear. Plus we also do have a pretty pointless post-credit scene involving Jason Momoa returning as Aquaman. But most of the cameos are saved for that final confrontation with Dark Flash. During a scene within the Speed Force, we see several different universes getting pulled together and colliding, and within these worlds we see a number of well-known DC characters and actors. Some of them appear almost holographic on the sides of these different worlds, such as Adam West as Batman and George Reeves as Superman. But it doesn't stop there. The worlds seem to open up and we get a glimpse into another universe with another speedster, and that speedster is Jay Garrick from the 2015 Flash TV series, and I'll bring this back up in a minute. But then we also get to see Christopher Reeve as Superman alongside Helen Slater as Supergirl. And then we see something which unfortunately I did know was going to be in this. Thank you, Andy Machete. And that is the appearance of Nicolas Cage as Superman fighting a giant spider. They actually made it. For those that don't know, back in the 90s there were plans for Tim Burton to direct a new Superman movie called Superman Lives, and Nicolas Cage had been cast as the Man of Steel. I don't know all the details about this movie before it was scrapped, outside of things that Kevin Smith has said, who was originally attached to write the project. But one of the things that he did talk about were the issues that he had with the producer, who insisted on some really strange decisions, including that the final fight had to include Superman fighting a giant spider, and there's even been some concept art released online for it too. Coincidentally, that producer went on to go and produce a movie called Wild Wild West starring Will Smith, and guess what that movie features?
He has an 80-foot tarantula.
Honestly, there's loads of stories about that movie out there, including a documentary, so if you want to find out more about it, I'd highly recommend checking them out. It's really interesting. As for the other cameos, I was worried that these would be a bit too gratuitous or distracting, but to me they really weren't. They're all only in this one scene, and that's pretty much it. Outside of the Nick Cage sequence, they're all pretty brief appearances, and I do like that. The main focus of this movie is Barry's story, and that comes first. As I said in my spoiler-free review, they could have quite easily just relied on nostalgia throughout this, but they don't, and it works much better because of it. I have seen a lot of debate online over how people feel about the multiverse cameos, especially George Reeves, who very sadly died in 1959. But the reason this cameo became divisive was because this movie, The Flash, was released in the US on the anniversary of his death, and that's something that I've only recently just found out. I highly doubt that it was deliberate or on purpose, and considering just how many other big movies are coming out throughout July and August, it made sense to try and give it a spot where it wasn't competing with too much else. Plus it needs to be out before Blue Beetle and Aquaman so that we can move on into the new era of DC. It hasn't stopped it from performing very poorly, but I do understand the financial reason behind it. And there is definitely a debate to be made regarding the morals of resurrecting deceased actors without their permission, and I do understand why a lot of people do feel the way they do. The cameos in this movie I don't think are disrespectful. I see it more as a tribute to the DC movies and DC characters of the past, but I do think that they could have done something a little bit different, like using stock footage or something, because the CG in these scenes is just I feel that if the families are okay with it and it isn't disrespectful to the actors, then it is okay. But this is definitely something that Hollywood really needs to look into, especially since this is becoming a regular thing. And as I said, the CGI in this sequence for a 2023 movie is really bad. They do look really strange, and while I will say there are a couple of shots that do look passable, some of the others, like Helen Slater, just do not look right. And I really can't understand why they actually got Nicolas Cage to come in and film his scenes in the suit and everything, and then replace him with a younger CGI double. I get that they wanted him to look like how he was meant to be in that film, but again, it just doesn't look finished. I mentioned in a spoiler-free review that I understand what they were going for with the overall look, but that was mainly aimed at the scenes involving the chronosphere and the weird kaleidoscopic visuals. But for the cameos, these are meant to be real people. To me, it just did not look finished, and it can take you out the movie. But this brings me on to my next point. Out of all the cameos that they did select to be in this movie, as awesome as some of them are, there are some very notable absences that I think would have worked a lot better in this movie. Linda Carter's Wonder Woman would have been a really good shout, and why not sneak in her theme as well? John Wesley Shipp's Flash from the 90s TV series. Robert Pattinson's Batman. The animated characters from the DCAU. Why not? Or, and I'm not alone in this, Grant Gustin. The guy who's been playing the Flash for years. Surely, out of all the people you could possibly get to appear in this movie, the person who most fans, including myself, would easily say is hands down the best actor to play the role in live action should get a cameo. Jay Garrick from that TV show does have an appearance, so why not the main character of that show? I know I have ripped into that show in the past, and I'll be honest, I did stop watching after the Crisis on Infinite Earths event, but Grant Gustin was incredible. He is the Flash. That makes no sense, and that is a big disappointment. I mean, any of the main characters from the Arrowverse could have appeared, and they only chose Jay Garrick. That is a big missed opportunity. I know that there are a lot of people that did want Christian Bale to appear, and while that could have been really fun, I am aware that they actually did ask him to appear multiple times, but he said no, purely because Christopher Nolan wasn't involved. I know that will be disappointing for a lot of you, myself included, but part of me is glad that they didn't go too far with this sequence and just cram everything that they possibly could into this. It's only a short sequence and there's only so much they can do, and while some of the cameos are questionable, I am happy with the rest, despite the really ropey CG. And I do need to bring this up, and that's how the general audience will react to this sequence, because I'd argue that most people outside of the DC fandom will not know who some of these characters are, and it might be really confusing for them. And that's part of the reason I think the DCEU movies have been as divisive as they have been, because they often do feel very tailored more towards hardened DC fans, and that can be very off-putting for the average moviegoer. And that's why I feel like the MCU managed to gain so much more popularity, because it was so much more accessible to people. So hopefully that is something that will start to change within the next era of the DC universe. Now I've got a question for you guys. Who else would you have liked to have seen in this movie? Let me know down in the comments. So is there a future for the Flash on the big screen? Honestly, I don't know. There has been talk about a sequel, but they have said that it all depends on how well the movie does, so I don't think that's happening. I have seen a lot of articles and videos surrounding why that is, and yes, some of them do have valid points, like the possible superhero fatigue, the numerous controversies, the public being less trusting of the DC brand, but I do think that there is something else going on, and it is something that is so much more simpler. People just don't have the money. The price of a ticket's gone up, heck, everything's gone up. Most movies are now easily accessible from home for free. Sometimes on the exact same day as the cinema release. Plus, with how many big movies are coming out now, you need to pick and choose what it is that you can afford to go and see. Because case in point, within a few weeks of each other, we had Across the Spider-Verse coming out. A couple of weeks later, The Flash comes out. A little while later, we've got Indiana Jones and Dial of Destiny, which came out last week. The week after, we've got Mission Impossible 7 coming out. The week after that, we've got Barbie and Oppenheimer, and then Ninja Turtles after that. There's just so much coming out that people really do have to be careful just how much it is that they are actually spending on going to the cinema, especially with how expensive it can be. So I definitely think that this is one of the biggest contributors to why it is that this movie is not doing anywhere near as well as people thought it might. But I'm not discounting a lot of those theories that people do have surrounding all the different reasons behind it, so I do understand where people are coming from. And when it comes back to this movie, Andy Muschietti has openly said that he does have ideas for a potential sequel, but the problem with that is that he has said that if they do go ahead with making a sequel, he will bring back Ezra Miller as the Flash. And considering everything that went on before this movie was released, I don't know anyone who wants that. Ezra Miller is somebody who does need help, and I don't think there's anybody who's going to disagree with me on this. After everything that they have done, everything they've been accused of, everything they've been proven to have done, they should not be a part of this franchise, and they definitely should not be a prominent part of it. I do see the Flash appearing within James Gunn's DCU at some point, but hopefully with a recast lead. The Flash is too important a character to not use, and if they do recast him, then I am genuinely looking forward to what it is that they have in store. I've got all sorts of ideas for stories and characters that they could use as part of the DC universe. Years ago, and I probably shouldn't be telling you this, I did create this gigantic timeline for a potential shared universe featuring DC Comics characters. I definitely went a little bit too overboard because I did start designing costumes and vehicles and all sorts, but I'll save that for another time. Look, when it came to this movie, I did enjoy it and I am happy with how it turned out overall, but there were definitely problems and it could have been better. And when it comes to the DCEU, the Snyderverse, I'm happy that this messy continuity has been brought to an end in maybe not the most satisfying of ways, but I am happy that they did manage to pull it off, and DC can now finally try and move on. I mean, it probably won't stop the Restore the Snyderverse bots, but oh well. And as I said, I am really looking forward to, and I'm really hopeful for what it is that James Gunn is going to bring to the next era of the DC universe. So I think I've bored you long enough, so I'm going to leave this video there for today. So if you have watched this video, thank you very much for sticking around. If you do enjoy this content, please like, please subscribe, hit the notification button to keep up to date on everything that's going on here. If you have seen The Flash, let me know what you think about it down in the comments. This has been a spoiler filled video, so if you do have any thoughts whatsoever, spoiler filled or not, let me know down in the comments. Plus, if you have any suggestions for any future Rewind reviews you would like me to do, let me know down below. And as I said in my spoiler-free review, I have been asked to do reviews for some of the older DCEU movies like Man of Steel, like Batman v Superman, and they are on the way, so keep an eye out for them. Plus, if you haven't had a chance to check out my spoiler-free review, that is available on my channel, and I will put a link to that down in the description. Thank you once again for watching, and I'll see you next time on Rewind Reviews. See you guys.